And we're back. Okay, so this is the second of our little web series of how to do your survey. Remember that in Project 1, the survey is the only thing that you're doing, which means you're creating a survey and you are not doing anything with it yet. Not until after you get it back for a grade, which is so it's due week after next in this particular time frame. So, what you're going to do now, you've got a topic, and you're going to have to come up with 10 or 12 statements. And the reason why I say statements and not questions is because this is going to, if you use the template, you don't have to, but if you're going to use the template, which is fine, the template is set up in such a way that it's got spaces for what we call Likert scale. Likert was just the guy that came up with this type of scale many years ago. You've seen them ad nauseum on all kinds of questionnaires you've done, and they're very useful in being able to test a range of people's opinions about attitudes. So what we're trying to measure now is people's attitudes, and so what you've got is a bunch of actually in this case 12 blanks. So when I say 10 to 12, it's not a magical number. It just has to do with the fact that that's how much space there is on that particular sheet of paper. So if you want, what you could do is, I mean, if you wanted to do more, you could just simply add more spaces. However, 10 or 12 is usually about right for this size of project. So what you're going to do is you're going to have to come up with 10 or 12 statements. Uh, and as I was saying, they're statements, not questions, like in the form of a statement, not a form of a question, because with that Likert scale, it implies that not this yes or no question. So a yes or no question, say if you were wanting to know whether or not somebody likes ice cream, you would not say, do you like ice cream, which is a question, because that implies a yes or no answer. And what you have is a range. People aren't going to say, um, do you like ice cream? And they're going to say, well, I mostly agree with that, right? They're going to say yes or no. But if you put it in an I statement, like it reads, I love ice cream. Then the person who's taking the survey looks at that and says, how true is that of me? And then they say, I mostly agree with that, or I strongly agree with that. Yeah, and of course it's going to be strongly agree because everybody loves ice cream. If you don't, then something wrong with you or something. I don't know. But in this particular case, you're going to come up with 10 to 12 statements. It's going to measure attitudes, how people feel about that particular topic that you've chosen. Um, I have a couple of in that folder. There are a couple of surveys that are just ideas. One of them I think is on abortion, people's opinions about abortion, and that's set up in such a way that it is uh, because of the way that most people do in fact feel about abortion, is under what conditions are you likely to say, yes, I agree with a woman's right to have access to a safe and legal abortion, versus when do you think, under what conditions, under what circumstances do you think that women shouldn't have access to that? Now, maybe you are a full-fledged believer in keeping the government out of women's wombs, so you might believe personally that you want to that this is something that women should have access to it regardless, 100% of the time, uh, and so therefore that's your own bias. We don't want to introduce our bias though, right? We don't want to have other people telegraph to our respondents what our opinions are. So in this particular case, in that example I had, I just put in a bunch of conditions, and then I leave it up to the people who are taking it, the respondents, to decide how they feel about it. Maybe there's someone who believes that a woman should not have access to abortion 100% of the time, right? Under no circumstances. and they believe that the government should be the one who decides whether or not a woman should be able to control her own reproduction that way. So those are a range of issues that people, of how people feel, a range of attitudes that you can measure on that. And you can also, because it's a Likert scale, you can measure the strength of that attitude. Not just do they agree with it or disagree with it, but to what degree do they agree or disagree with it? From strongly agree to strongly disagree. Excuse me. So you're going to have to come up with about 10 or 12 statements. So I would get if it were me, I would get like a legal pad or something, and I would just start kind of jotting down ideas. I might think about what are the different aspects of this. So if you were interested in people's opinions about, let's say, and I'm just spitballing here, I'm just throwing out, I'm just thinking something on the fly. Say people's opinions of immigration. Well, immediately it seems like you could split immigration into how do people feel about legal immigration, documented immigration? Do they think it's a good thing, a bad thing? Are they sort of isolationistic and think that we should need to just stop immigration? Or do they believe, for example, that this is a nation of immigrants and that we should have that we should make that process as streamlined and as easy for people as possible? You could also even that part you could break down into, even if we were going to let people in, say that's something that you think that or maybe somebody out there thinks that we should do since we're a nation of immigrants. Then the question becomes, under what circumstances? Who do we want in? Do we want to let in anyone, or do we want to let in, only people that are maybe refugees and asylees, people who are escaping some kind of persecution? Maybe we want to, if we want to think about it from an economic standpoint, we could be thinking about, should we let people in who have extremely high skill levels, so that would help maybe certain parts of our economy. Maybe you believe that, or another way to think about it is not what you believe necessarily, but what the respondents believe. Another aspect of that is, what if what about all of those low-end jobs? What about jobs that many Americans don't even want to do because they're often very low pay, low prestige jobs, picking lettuce, for example. Who's going to do those jobs? So maybe we need immigrants for those. So realize that there's that right there, just for legal immigration, you got easily good 5 or 6 questions right off the bat. And then for undocumented immigration, you could also look at maybe figure out some different aspects of it. For example, what should be the criteria, and then what should we have different ways of dealing with it? What should we do about, for example, for people who came here legally, and then because of the bureaucracy and the red tape and the cost and all that stuff, because we made it so difficult to stay here sometimes once you get here. Say you come here on a visa, a work visa, and then because of all the cost and red tape and stuff, you overstay your visa and you're not able to renew it. At that point, you're now considered undocumented. You're now illegal. But in the meantime, you've been here for 20 years, and you've got kids here who are born here. Now they're U.S. citizens, right? So you can see this is a lot more complex. What are we going to do? We're going to kick those people out? They're U.S. citizens. It's unconstitutional for us to, force people out out of the country without due process if they're U.S. citizens. So, okay, then what are we going to do? Are we going to split up families? Right? Are we just going to kick out the parents and leave their kids sitting there and in their house and looking at each other? Right? These are all issues. And so what I'm saying is as you think these things through, you can come up with a number of ways that that you could statements that you could make, that you could create, that that could measure those ideas. And so that's going to be that process of creating those statements. And again, remember their statements. Do not phrase them as questions if you're going to use that Likert scale, because that's the first thing I'm going to do. If I'm looking through those, I see questions, I see question marks, or I see that they're questions. Even sometimes people will put they won't put the question marks. They'll just put them as questions and think apparently that I don't notice that. That's going to be the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to be writing reword, 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 reword all the way down your sheet as I'm grading it. And of course, you're going to lose some points for that. Now, if you're doing your own survey and you're not using the template and you want to do yes or no questions, which you can do, then you can ask questions. But it's up to you. I mean, you're the researcher. You have to figure out what you want to know. Now, here's a little trick here. The first page on that are what we call attitudinal questions or attitudinal statements, right? Those are ones that are designed to measure how people feel about the topic. They're not asking factual questions. You're not asking behavioral questions. So you're not there's no place on that front page that you need to ask a question that for example, asks people, do they know someone who is an undocumented immigrant? You're not going to ask them, something about their behavior. How many times a day or a week or a month do they do something? Those are all going to be on page 2, which are what we call your demographic variables, your demographic questions. Those, if you see that on there, it has age, sex, race and ethnicity, education level, income, and I believe that one's got religious affiliation. Okay. So those first 3, age, sex, and race and ethnicity, are pretty standard. I mean, I can't imagine you asking you're asking those questions, all those, doing a survey and not having those answered. So I think those are pretty much kind of written in stone. You're going to probably want to know that information. For example, you might want to know, did men answer differently than women? You might want to know what, within certain age groups that you create afterward. How did people feel about that? Do people who are under 30 feel differently than people who are 30 to 50? Right? Those are things that you might want to know. Then you're going to also need to decide those last 3, whether, with education level, income level, and religiosity or religious affiliation. Do you need those? If your topic is something like abortion, religion is probably relevant to your topic. So you'll want to keep that on there. But what if you're asking about something like immigration? Well, is it relevant? I could see where it might be. I mean, if you're wanting to know, do certain religious groups or non-religious people answer differently than people who are religious or in these different groups? That might be relevant. Then again, you might also think, I may not need to know that. You're the researcher, so these are your decisions to make. You might say to yourself, well, I really don't need to know their education level because I'm giving all of my, my entire sample is going to be DMAC students, fellow students in my different classes, or they're on campus, that you're going to be handing these out to people when you get after you get this graded and you're moving on to the project 2. Once you get to that point, you might say, well, I'm planning on giving them all out to other DMAC students, and we're all basically freshmen and sophomores. So what good, how much information am I really going to glean from this idea of having, that question about education level? If you're giving it to a more diverse group that involves, say, you plan on having some of your professors hand it out or take it as well to compare or something like that, then maybe that is relevant then, because you'll want to know people who have graduate degrees. How do they feel differently about that than people who have less education? So you have to ask yourself. And by the way, if you don't need one of these questions, just take it out. And you might want to put in questions that are relevant to you, to your topic, and you just create them. All right. So that is the end of this one. We're almost at 15 minutes, so sorry. Um, I'm kind of long-winded about this stuff. So I'm going to stop this one for now, and I'm going to go on to the next kind of grouping, and then we will talk about that. All right.